Hey, good afternoon or good morning for those on the West Coast, and thanks for joining today. My name is Sean Evans, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. So we have a great presentation lined up for you, but before we start, I'd like to take care of a couple of house cleaning items. One, we want to encourage you to use your computer speakers if you're dialing in from your desk. It just makes it a little bit easier. But if you are dialing in by phone, please see the audio dial-in information there below on the slide. So you can join by phone as well. At the end of the presentation, we are going to have a Q&A session, so you can enter in your questions through the chat window, and I will see them there and then can offer them up. So also one more thing I want to mention is that at the end of the webinar, we're going to have a 3-question survey that will pop up, just kind of asking how the event went today, looking for your feedback. So to appreciate you taking the time to do that. It just helps us make better presentations. And so let's go ahead and get started and introduce today's presenter. So today's presenter is Lee Gerard, and Lee is the Lifecycle Management Product Manager for our ATG platform here at Veeder-Root. And so Lee has over 25 years of industry experience, including work with ATGs, vapor recovery, fuel flow, submersible pumps, and hanging hardware. He also possesses a technical field background as well as some sales experience. So very well-rounded background and perfectly suited to lead us through our presentation today. And without me talking anymore, I'd like to turn it over to Lee, and we'll get started.
Okay, great, Sean. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you joining us today. For those on the West Coast and those on the East Coast, hopefully everybody's having a good day. So what we want to do is cover one of the segments that's part of the EPA requirement that came out in 2015. So for today, we're going to talk about piping and underground piping systems. So we have 4 things that we want to cover. Leak detection requirements for your underground piping systems. The second one we want to cover is the methods of leak detection that you can use. The third thing we want to cover is the difference between the mechanical and electronic line leak detection systems that are out there, so you know which systems are best suited for your application. And then fourth, talk about the new equipment and maintenance regulations, because that's really important as time evolves here. So let's get going. So the first thing I want to talk about here is your pressurized piping system and the requirements that they put forth for pressurized systems. So basically what they're saying here is if you have a regulated pressurized piping system, you must have some type of leak detection capability that can pick up a leak quickly so contamination is not spread within your UST and onto potentially other property. So what they've done here is they basically are saying that if you install pressurized piping on or before April 11th, 2016, you need to meet the following requirements. So the first one is the piping must have an automatic line leak detector in it. Now, that means it can use a mechanical leak detector or it can use an electronic leak detector. The regulation basically states that you have to be able to stop or restrict flow when the system detects a leak at a specific leak rate, and also have the ability to alarm when there's a release detected. And in addition to that, you're going to have to conduct an annual tightness test on that piping, or use some type of monthly monitoring that you can use, such as interstitial monitoring, vapor monitoring, the groundwater, SIR, reconciliation, some continuous intake leak detection capabilities, or some of the other approved methods. So again, you have to do 2 things. You have to be able to detect the leak using an automatic line leak detector that can stop or restrict flow or activate an alarm when a release is detected. And then second, you must do an annual tightness test or use a monthly monitoring method on that pipe. So continuing talking about the pressurized piping system, So again, we're going to talk a little bit about what the requirements are here. So we're talking about pressurized piping that was installed after April 11th and what you need to do for that. So one of the things you have to do if you install pipe after April 11th this year, you have to have secondary containment. So if you look at the picture over the right, that's just an illustration of a double wall piping system. The inside pipe's the primary, and the outside pipe is the, we'll call the secondary, where there's an interstitial space between the two. On top of that, you have to put interstitial monitoring that can detect a leak in the space between the primary and the secondary barrier. That's that illustration over to your right. Now, one thing you're going to have to do is no later than October 13th of 2018, you must perform every 3 years what they call a containment sump test or liquid tightness on the sumps that have your submersible pump in. Now, you can also use interstitial monitoring for piping, or if you use double wall containment sumps and you use periodic interstitial monitoring for that space, then you meet the requirement. So again, on the right-hand side, the secondary containment sump with containment monitoring, you see the sensor in the yellow, that is providing that monitoring of the interstitial space for the pipe system. If you have a double wall containment sump, you'd have to have a sensor inside that wall also. One more thing that we just wanted to cover on the pressurized piping system is, again, April 11th, 2016, after that date, if you repair 50% or more of your piping in a single run, the regulations requiring you to replace the entire piping system with secondary containment piping. So with the illustration over to the right here, if we had to remove 50% of our single wall pipe, then they are going to require that you replace it with secondary containment piping, the entire run. Now, one thing I want to talk about, which doesn't get talked about very often, is cathodic protection and metal piping. There's still quite a few that out there. You know, depends on what region you are in the United States. There are regions throughout the world that do still use steel piping. So one of the things we just want to make sure everybody's brushed up on is that if you have metal piping systems and cathodic protection, and it was installed before December 22nd, 1988, you have to have cathodic protection. That was the regulation they put in place. The owner must test, inspect, and keep records of the equipment for the cathodic protection. So on top of that, they need to test the cathodic protection system by a certified cathodic protector tester. They must inspect the system every 60 days, which we call an impressed current system, and you have to keep the last 3 inspection results. Now, if you installed it after 1988, the piping material has to be non-corrodable material such as fiberglass. So they're basically saying after an 88, you should have been putting fiberglass in. Steel piping must be made of steel, having a corrosion-resistant coating, or having cathodic protection. So that's what you have to do after December 22nd, 1988, decide to do that. There's not that many piping manufacturers out there that make steel pipe with some type of fiberglass resistance like they do with tanks, like the Stipe 3 tanks. The next section we want to talk about is suction piping systems. Now, suction systems are, again, they're not very common in the U.S. They are out there. They're more in the European market. We see some down in the Latin and South America market. So, you know, the release detection methods for suction systems depends on the type of suction piping system you have. So, no release detection is required if the suction piping system has the following. If the below-grade piping that operates under atmospheric pressure, which is possible, you connect it that way, there's enough slope so the product in the pipe can drain back in the tank when the suction is released, like you putting your finger on a straw and releasing it, and then only having one check valve, which is close as possible beneath the pump in the dispensing unit. And that check valve is basically your finger on the hose or on the straw. So when you're done pumping, that check valve closes and it keeps the line primed. If you didn't have that, the line would drain all the time, and you have to prime the line over and over every time you dispense. Years ago, they used to put a foot valve at the bottom of the tank to perform that same function. The problem with that is that those foot valves would fail, and then it'd be very difficult to try to replace it. So they started putting the check valve underneath the dispensers. A little bit more about suction. So if you have suction, and and based on the material and the design, you can be exempt, like we talked about a little bit earlier. However, if your suction piping was installed on or before April 11, 2016, it does not meet all the design criteria noted above, what we talked about, then you either have to do a monthly monitoring using one of the monthly methods described in the previous slide, and you got to do a tightness testing on the piping system every 3 years. So that's a little bit different for suction systems that have been installed after April of 2016. Now let's talk about the methods of leak detection for your piping system that's out there. So leak detection for underground piping methods, basically these methods have to be able to detect at a 3 gallon per hour leak rate and meet federal regulatory requirements for the life of the underground piping system. Typically there's 2 types. We talked about them earlier, pressurized and suction. Excuse me. Pressurized piping systems, for instance, can use mechanical leak detectors that have the ability to detect 3 gallon per hour leaks, and they can restrict flow. An electronic device can perform the same test, however it stops flow. But in addition to that, it also can perform a 0.2 and 0.1 gallon per hour test if it has the capability in the software in the automatic tank gauge. And then the third piece here is a suction piping system. If the piping is sloped enough so the pipe can drain back into the tank, that's what they want to see. And again, if the check valve is installed as close to the suction pump in the dispensing unit, that keeps the system prime. And if that check valve ever fails, you'll know because your customers will complain that it's taking a long time for them to dispense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pros versus the cons when it comes to mechanical leak detectors and electronic leak detection. So on the mechanical side of it, we've seen that the life expectancy of most leak detectors are about 24 months because it's a mechanical device. If they do fail in an open positions, which can happen, it's possible that you will never detect a leak, which is also concerning. And then also it has impacts by thermal contraction. So in the morning, if you have cold mornings and it warms up, you could potentially get slow flow or what they call morning sickness on the mechanical leak detector, which is going to be a nuisance for your customers, or we call them nuisance trips, and potentially you could have customers driving off. Now, some of the pros and cons about electronic leak detection. One of the positive things about it, we know it doesn't impact flow rate, it doesn't restrict flow. It is an electronic device, so it's a pressure transducer, and it's very accurate when it comes to pressure readings. Now, one of the cons that some customers might consider is because it shuts down dispensing. However, if you do have a leak, you do want to shut down so you're not continually pumping product in at a lower gallon per hour leak rate into the environment. Now, one thing you can do is you can test manually if it did shut down. So, for instance, if it alarmed and said, "Hey, I have a failure," you can go up to the ATG that's controlling the leak detector and perform a manual test, because it could simply have been a check valve that's stuck in the pump that caused the potential failure, and just simply turning the pump back on may fix that problem. However, if it alarms again, we expect you to call your local contractor and have them come out and investigate to make sure you don't have a leak. And then again, it provides instant feedback if the device isn't communicating to that ATG system. So for Veeder-Root products, for instance, if our leak detector is running and then all of a sudden it stopped communicating, you actually get an alarm from the system and it will shut you down to let you know that you are not in compliance anymore because your leak detector is not functioning properly. So now let's move over to the new equipment maintenance regulation. So basically what the regulation is saying here is that no later than October 13th of 2018, owners and operators are going to have to perform their first annual release detection equipment test. So that means you're going to have to test the components that are part of that ATG unit, which could be the in-tank probes that do the inventory. Could be the sensors that are monitoring your interstitial spaces, your containment areas, your spill buckets, your under dispenser containment, things like that. And you're also going to have to test your automatic line leak detectors to make sure everything's working properly. So testing electronic and mechanical components for the proper operation are going to meet the following options. So we'll start over to the far left here. So on the automatic tank gauge side, they're going to want you to test the alarm. They want you to verify the system's configuration to make sure it's programmed right. And they're going to want to see that you've tested the battery backup if it has a battery backup system. Now on the probes and sensors that are part of that ATG system, they're going to want you to inspect any buildup of material on the probes or sensors because they've been sitting in murky water or just a bad environment, and make sure you clean them and reset them. Ensure that the floats are moving freely on the probes to make sure you're getting accurate inventory of water detection. Again, on the probes for the in-tank side, make sure the shafts are not damaged and they look clean and they're operating properly. Now the key here for us at Veeder-Root is cables. A lot of folks think cables last forever. They don't because of the environment they're in, so making sure the cables are free of kinks and they don't have any breaks, but more importantly, they're not breaking down over time. Get a cable out in the manhole for 10, 12 years, potentially, the cable's going to fail at some point. And then the next one is test the alarm operability and communication with the controller. So making sure that when you disconnect a probe or a sensor, that it communicates and provides an alarm condition back at the device, telling you that it's not talking to the device or it's got an error. Now over to the right, about the automatic leak detectors, they're going to want you to ensure the device activates, so restricts flow or shuts off flow within an hour when simulating a release of 3 gallons per hour at a 10 pound per square inch rate. And this can be done by leak detector testers and equipment that we have and most testers out there have already, so they can induce these simulated leaks to ensure your system's working properly. Now, if you're using vacuum pumps and pressure gauges, you got to ensure these devices have proper communications with the sensor or the controller they're using to talk to them. Now, if you're using any handheld electronic sampling equipment, such as some of the sniffers that are out there that do groundwater monitoring or vapor monitoring, you're going to have to make sure those devices are operating properly. There's no regulation on calibration on these devices that I'm aware of, so you may want to make sure that that device is being checked by whoever's doing your annual certification. You might want to ask them about it to make sure it's accurate. Again, owners and operators must maintain records of the release detection equipment tests for at least 3 years. So when you have one of these done, you're going to get a document from the tester that's going to indicate that they've completed the test, these are the things that passed, these may be the things that need to be failed, and that you need to repair. Maybe the same company can do those repairs for you. Similar to like when you go and take your automobile to an auto repair shop and they do a inspection on your car and they find that your brakes are 70% worn. They're going to want you to potentially replace the brakes. It could be something simple as the sensor's not working properly and it needs to be replaced. So just remember that when they're providing you that feedback. And the last thing here on this slide is just an illustration of Veeder-Root, Red Jacket, Catlow, and our Insight 360. We have equipment that covers the entire retail and commercial industrial business when it comes to dispensing product, everything from submersible pumps to mag probes to sensors to automatic leak detectors, control boxes, nozzles, swivel. So keep us in mind when you're considering making some type of changes or upgrades to your site, because we have a family of products that provide you a lot of protection from an environmental perspective, but also provide you phenomenal business tools to be able to run your business more effectively. So, Sean, that's what I have today, so I'll just hand it over to you at this point.
Great. Thanks, Lee. Thanks for good information there, and thanks, everyone, for staying with us. And just to remind you that we are recording today's session, so it'll be available for playback later on if you want to see it again. And one other mention that when you exit the webinar, there will be a 3 poll questions that will pop up, and we encourage you to fill those out to help us make these better. So we did have a couple of questions come in through the chat window. And first one here is, what is the life expectancy of an electronic line leak detection device?
Okay, so I can answer that from the Veeder-Root's perspective. I don't know about other tank gauge manufacturers that develop these. So typically, the electronic leak detector, based on our warranty return rates, we see electronic leak detectors that last anywhere from 5 to 10 years, as long as they're being inspected and they're being tested periodically. So typically, we see 5 to 10 years overall that they survive, because they're electronic device. They are a sealed device, so we don't have the issues of any type of foreign matter getting inside of them and deteriorating them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lee. See, one other question here. Is there an advantage of an annual tightness test versus performing a monthly method for compliance?
Sure. Okay, so if you were monitoring electronic lines on a monthly basis, we call that risk management. And the reason we call that is that the system's going to try to run a 0.2 gallon per hour test as often as possible when it sees the opportunity. If you have a leak of 0.2 gallons per hour under your dispenser, for instance, at a union or at a meter, you're going to be able to detect that. The system doesn't shut down because you can program it not to shut that down. It tells you got a problem. You go investigate and you find the leak and you repair it. One, that saves you money from an environmental spill point of view. Two, if you were losing 0.2 gallons per hour for a week, that's quite a bit of gas that you're losing into your bucket. And then if you were performing the 0.1, unfortunately, that's great. It's a small leak rate, but you're only performing that once a year. So it takes a whole year before you're going to detect any type of small leak, especially if you don't have under dispenser containment that tells you that you have a leak underneath the dispenser. So typically what we have for our customers are running the 0.2 risk management feature on basically it's a daily basis whenever the system has a chance, and they at least get a 0.2 test in once a month.
Okay. Great. I think that's all the questions we have for today, but I did want to thank everyone for joining. As a reminder, we're going to have this recording that we will make available later. If you have any questions, my contact information is there. Feel free to send me an email, as well as on the screen there you can see information for Veeder-Root technical support. And look on Veeder.com for more of these EPA webinars as we have them available. So thanks again for joining, and hope you have a great day.